Welcome one and all to my retrospective of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Some of you will know that this project started as a series of videos that would span just a few months. Those months turned into years very quickly, and now we stand at just under 3 years since I started discussing Twilight Princess at length. You could very well say that this retrospective itself has been haunting me throughout the entire process. Twilight Princess is my favourite Zelda game, bar none, even to this day. I had a short stint where I thought Tears of the Kingdom had been crowned over it, but Twilight Princess still reigns supreme. This retrospective itself will go through every major story beat in the game. To keep it somewhat brief, I didn't discuss every single thing I physically could, but I feel like I get weirdly close considering I haven't even included side quests until the very end of the video. Real quick side note by the way, a lot of the footage from this video is from channels like ZorZelda and ZeldaMaster. I promise one day I'll bulk record the older Zelda titles, but those channels saved my life creating this, and a lot of my videos to be honest. Also keep in mind that yeah, these videos were originally a mini-series, so there are certain kinks I've had to iron out between episodes that you may notice from time to time. From a young age, Twilight Princess did haunt me. I was of the age where I could play this game, get a good kick out of being a little bit scared due to the darker tone, marvel at the fact that you could play as Wolf Link, and that's about it. I played through the first couple of dungeons when I was younger, but yeah, that's about it. As I grew up, I found myself regularly harkening back to those old playing days. I have many reasons for why I got into the Zelda YouTube community, but one of them was due to that connection I had with Twilight Princess from an early age. So this retrospective describes all the ways that this game haunts me, in all of the best ways. In the most cliche sentence I'll probably ever use on this entire channel, I think why I love the opening to Twilight Princess more than most people is because it symbolises the calm before the storm. As we find out later in the game, the world around Ordon Village is slowly collapsing, but these villagers don't know that. The animals around them don't know that. It's so incredibly peaceful that you don't think anything could be happening around you. You wait for the moment where an earthquake does happen. But it doesn't. Because there is no massive threat to the Ordonians, the village is just living as it always has. The stunning lack of awareness from the residents is what makes the beginning of the game just so compelling to me. They're so unaware that one of the village's most fierce warriors, Russell, literally asks Link to deliver a sword to Hyrule Castle completely unknowing of what was going on, unaware of the Twilight and how much of the world was slowly being taken over. After a long talk, the pair make their way back to Ordon Village after one of the more emotional openings to a Zelda game in my opinion, with two friends just having a heart-to-heart discussion. He wakes up the next morning and this is where the game starts its really long tutorial. There are many people that hate this tutorial, and I cannot inherently say to someone that they are wrong for that opinion, because truthfully, there was a time where I used to absolutely hate the opening to this game. It used to aggravate me. We'll get into the specifics of the stuff that you have to do in Ordon, but it's a load of stuff that you shouldn't have to do at the start of a game, especially a Zelda game, and especially when you compare the tutorial of this game to Ocarina of Time's, the title that Twilight Princess takes 90% of its original identity from. I say I used to hate this tutorial because I think the more I play through it, the more respect I have for it. Twilight Princess is one of the more epic Zelda games in scope, and while I love the game, I know that its open world isn't as good as other games in the series. This means that when you're traversing the world later on in the game, you don't really get much downtime. So as I said at the start of this section, this is much like the calm before the storm. It's the calm before everything is thrown at you. Do this, do that, have some side quests. Even when you're traversing the overworld, it's not like other Zelda games where it's likely that enemies won't spawn without it being nighttime. Hyrule Field just has enemies there most of the time. Along with that, for the first half of the game, the field has this strong sense of impending doom, which isn't a bad thing as I'll discuss in a future video in the series, but I think this little bit of the game, where everything feels nice, is absolutely necessary to set the tone for what the usual atmosphere of Hyrule and Ordon Village is. It's just peaceful, sure. Kids might be chasing monkeys, but it's just a peaceful village with a farm. I won't get into all the very big specifics, but Link has to herd some goats over the course of a couple of days with his trusty steed Epona. He finds a fish for Sarah's cat, so she feels up to the task of running her own shop again so she can sell the hero of Twilight her slingshot. Link might also take down a bee's nest if he wishes to, and shows off his slingshotting ability to Tallow, Mallow, and Beth. Meanwhile, Colin, the son of Russell and his wife, tends to Epona. Russell then sends Link a sword. Link shows off his sword skills to the kids before Talon makes a run for a monkey that's been hassling the kids for a while now. Of course, gameplay wise, this section is just meant to serve as a moment where you take all of the combat abilities that you've just learned and actually apply them into real gameplay. But if we take that away for just a second, and this is something that can be learnt from pretty much all incarnations of the hero, from the moment the beginning of the game takes place and Link picks up his first sword, even if it is just a wooden one, he is completely courageous. Courage has been Link's main character trait for years now, but I always think that's shown best at the start of these games. Usually the hero is thrown into these situations and he has to sort them, otherwise people could get hurt. In Ocarina of Time, he goes into the Deku Tree at his request to save the forest. In Majora's Mask, he barely has any option, but even after he returns to human form, he works to save Termina. In Wind Waker, he tries to save his sister. Skyward Sword, he's trying to save Zelda from the opening story beat. In all of these games, they perfectly show the hero off as being courageous from the opening, and as usual, that's also true here, with him venturing deep into the woods to try and find these kids who have scrambled off. While he finds the others on the way, he keeps digging further and further through the woods before finally reaching Talos. He's been captured outside of a giant tree opening in a cage, but with a few swift thrusts of Link's sword, the problem is dealt with pretty darn quickly. Russell apologises to Link while he's on his way back to the village, but thanks him for taking such good care of the kids. Now, I personally think that it's at this point that Russell realises that Link would be some sort of hero at a future date. It was just a matter of when, though he likely wouldn't have guessed it would just be coming the day after. The hero sleeps and wakes the day that he'll be dropping the sword at Hyrule Castle. He's almost ready to go, both swords at the ready, before he notices Epona's gone. He goes to a nearby spring where his childhood friend Ilia likes to spend her time with the horse. She's an overly caring person, not a bad thing, but it means that when she finds out Link has been using Epona almost daily, she's not happy. After a long talk and I guess some persuasion, Ilia allows Link to leave with his horse, unaware of what lurked around the corner. A giant boar, mounted by something, enters the spring and attacks Ilia and our hero. After awaking from this blow, Link shows off his courage yet again and sprints in the direction of Hyrule Field, in the hopes that the creature went in a roundabout that direction. Though his plan does come to a halt as he comes to a wall of weird goopy stuff, which I think is the actual scientific term for the Twilight. He's dragged in and goes through a transformation that would be very gruesome if it was made by any other game or movie company, and passes out. Though while all of this happens, somebody is watching. The hero awakes in a cell. All semblance of that calm from Ordon has been lost, instead exchanged for terror. I mean heck, Link has literally been transformed into a dog. You cannot get more unknown than this. You wake up in an unknown body, in an unknown area, and you're locked in a cell. Link awakes to the same thing who watched him hours earlier. You're later told of her name, but she is simply one of the best parts of Twilight Princess, Midna. Later on in the series, I do a whole video on her because she can truly make or break the game for a lot of people. She says she'll help you out of the building if you help her. After some running around the sewers and noticing that you can now see people in soul form, Link comes to a tower, and using Midna and her abilities with a section of the Fused Shadow, climbs the tower before coming out into the open. All at once it hits you. The hero did come to the Castle of Hyrule on that day that was specified, just in all of the wrong scenarios. This section of the game really goes against everything you'd seen so far and sets the stage for what you'll be doing and how you'd be feeling for the next 20 hours or so of gameplay. Now, Wolf Link isn't the best. I will be the first to admit that, and I'll probably keep saying it over the course of this series, but this tutorial section for your abilities is pretty darn nice in my opinion, and is one of the least annoying sections of the game where you play as Wolf Link. You make your way to the top of the highest tower in the castle where the princess sits. I won't go into any of the nitty gritty, but Midna and the Princess of Hyrule, Princess Zelda, seem to know each other somehow, and Zelda knows those shadow beasts are chasing Midna, so she must take her leave and try and find the rest of the Fused Shadow. With that, the imp takes the hero back to Ordon and asks him to find a sword and a shield. Seeing the reactions to you around the village is pretty sad considering how beloved Link was by the village in human form. You can't really blame them. Even if one of my friends like Brandoge turned into a wolf, I'd still be scared considering I don't know it's him. Anyway, very small rant aside, after committing some form of theft to numerous houses in the village, you set back to the spring. At this point you're ambushed and you're shown how to defeat bigger shadow monsters. I've never been too much of a fan of this combat, but over time I've come to appreciate that there aren't many of these battles over the course of the game, and each of these battles functions subordinately as a puzzle, and I don't mind that at all. The next thing you have to do is find all of the Tears of Light for the Spirit of Faron. This is the least tedious of these sections of the game, but as you'll come to discover in the next video in this series, yeah, I don't like these parts of the game. They're pretty annoying and are really long in the other two areas where you have to do the same. But I think this one is pretty darn effective. Exploring an area you've already discovered earlier in the game serves to zero in on how quickly the atmosphere changed and how much it changed. After collecting all of these tears, the spirit of Faron transforms the hero back from his beastly form back into a human, since the twilight had been lifted from the land. Link realises he's back to human form, and while grasping his former reality, he looks at his clothing. The spirit informs him that the green garb he wears is of significant nature to the history of Hyrule, and I think this is just a great way to keep the lore of the Hero of Time going, especially since this was the second time they'd done such a thing in a 3D game after Wind Waker. In that game, he was hailed as a hero for everything he did for the land, but in Twilight Princess, he was merely a puppet to play in the capturing of Ganondorf. So when the spirit says that the Hero of Time's power is now his, it means his courage and very little more. It shows a different side of the Hero of Time that we see much more later on in the game. Told to save the land, Link begins his adventure, everything left behind, the rest of Ordon left behind him, his own home. This was the start of his journey, and it's certainly an epic journey, but I think this understated, slower, more methodical way of approaching the beginning of the game was a good way of showing, once again, the calm before the storm. Of course, the start of the game really isn't great for a lot of people, and I don't think it's perfect in any regard. Out of all of the episodes in this series I have planned out, this was the hardest episode to write, but writing it has given me even more newfound respect for the beginning of this amazing game, and I hope I've at least showed some of you why I think it isn't a horrible opening to a game like some people seem to think it is. To me, dungeons have always felt like the lifeblood of the Legend of Zelda series. It's the only part of Breath of the Wild that I thought was truly lacking when it comes down to it. Other pieces of the game had some stuff missing, but dungeons were a disappointment. Dungeons being my favourite part of Zelda games makes sense though, since this game is my favourite of them all. Twilight Princess has some of the single best dungeons in the series. I think 3 of my top 5 all come from this game. So let's pick up right where we left off as we begin with the first few dungeons in the game. Last time we went through the entire beginning of this game, all the way up to the Spirit of Light leaving the hero of Twilight with his journey. His goal: to free the land of Hyrule from the ruling of the usurper King Zan. With this, he sets out to the only temple in the entirety of the Faron Woods, the Forest Temple. In this episode, I won't go into the story quite as much until maybe the end, because the dungeons are so intricately designed and could be talked about at length, and this full retrospective series is already going to be well over an hour, so I'll just talk about the stuff that I need to, since there is a lot to unpack in the first 3 areas of the game. The Forest Temple seems like it's pretty unfavoured when compared to the rest of the dungeons in Twilight Princess. I see a whole ton of people that complain about the monkeys making this dungeon one of the most linear affairs in the game. Some people take issue with the theme itself, or just see it as bad. Let me be straightforward with you guys right now. This is my pick for the worst dungeon in this game. Saying that, I don't think that it's objectively horrible, and I don't think it's anywhere near the worst in the series. So let's start with the good. Atmospherically, this area is no slouch. I think that all of the music in the Faron section of this game are amazing, and this carries on that trend. While this track isn't quite as catchy as the other ones, it does well to set the tone, especially for what is the tutorial dungeon. The enemies in here are also really well selected. Instead of starting the game up, getting into the first temple, and instantly going up against threats like the Darknuts and other humanoid creatures, you're mostly going up against wildlife and bugs. Heck, the only sort of humanoid creature you actually go up against is a baboon, furthering that point. The scariest thing you go up against in the entire zone is a few big Skulltulas. I also think some of the puzzles are pretty cool, but leave something to be desired down to the ease of them. And yeah, that's about where my criticism begins. It's very handholdy, usually showing you the exact location that you always need to go. The main goal of the temple is to find monkeys too. I haven't had this happen to me before, but I'd imagine missing one of those monkeys would be dreadful, since you'd have to run all the way around the temple again. And like I said, the dungeon itself is a little too easy, so that'd just be annoying. And it's a theme that we've seen a few times now, and I think it was done much better in older games. As a quick example, the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time was better than this. I'd go as far as to say this was one of the worst to rock this theme. With the knowledge that this is the opening dungeon though, it's not too surprising. The first of all of them is usually the most simplistic in each Zelda game, since it's showing new players how the game functions. So yeah, it has that on its side, I guess. One thing that this dungeon does really well in my opinion is introducing a character and instantly showing the difference in their character when they're not being possessed by some kind of evil. Ook the Baboon won't be winning any character nominees at this year's Game Awards, but they are a cool character anyway. They're the leader of the monkeys being possessed by a parasitic mite, after having that cut off in the mini-boss fight of the dungeon by the hero, and with him giving Link a really cool item. Seriously, the Gale Boomerang is a new take on an old item, which is something this game does really right, as you'll see as this series goes on. The boss of the Forest Temple is okay. It's basically a giant couple of Dakubabas, named Diababa, and it uses the new item pretty well and has some cool themes and is really epic in scale. But the coolest thing this fight does is reintroduce Ook the Baboon and have him help you take down the plague on the temple. With an assist from Ook, Link restores the peace in Faron Woods. At least for now anyway. After dealing with Diababa and collecting the first of 3 fused shadow pieces, Link and Midna make their way out and go on over to Hyrule Field. Now I won't stay on this long since I might do another video in the future on the side content in this game since I've been going through the game on stream recently, but Hyrule Field in this game gets quite a lot of flack I think. It's not the most dense area in the franchise, but it adds to the scope of the game and increases the epic factor tenfold, which, you know, feels like it had a very large part to play in the design process all the way down to the graphics. Nevertheless, Midna and Link make their way to Kakariko Village, where Colin, Tallow, Mallow and Beth have all been spotted. Here is where Link has to once again turn into a wolf, and I will likely always stand by the fact that these are some of the worst sections in the game, so much so that I didn't really want to talk about them. Sometimes they do some clever things, but it just feels tedious at times in my opinion. The cool thing about this wolf section is that it doesn't just revolve around some pretty boring gameplay and some exploration that can be fun in a way. It actually plays into the story in a really weird way. There's this moment where you're in a building full of bombs and it blows up as you're trying to find the Tears of Light, which interrupts production of bombs for a small section of the game. A small thing, but it tries to show us that this world is actually lived in, which is very appreciated. After saying hello to the children of Ordon once again, Link makes his way back to Ordon Village to tell the chief of Ordon that he needs something from him as teased by Ronaldo. After a tense wrestling match between the pair, the chief entrusts the secret weapon for defeating the Gorons in their own wrestling game. With these new items, the iron boots, Link makes his way back to the village, then a horrifying scene plays. The calm of the village being broken by King Bulblin as he takes Colin. Link takes chase and knocks the king off the Great Hylian Bridge, saving a wounded Colin from the brink of capture. He drops off the injured child to Kakariko. After wrestling a Goron in one of the single coolest moments in Zelda history, he's granted entry into the Goron Mines. Of all of the 3D fire dungeons in the Zelda series, this is likely my favourite of the bunch, though some of the others such as the Fire Temple and the Fire Sanctuary come pretty darn close since I quite like all of them. Saying that, it doesn't rank that highly in my ranking of the dungeons in this game, probably coming in around middle of the pack. As most of the dungeons in this game do, it really feels like this has a place in the world, thanks in no small part to it being a mine. This is a place that would be in the real world. If the Gorons lived on Earth, then they would likely make these exact mines and would have machinery all over the place. The puzzle design being focused around traversal a lot of the time is really cool too. Some of the coolest puzzles in the game are the ones where you drop down and equip the iron boots, because it just feels so good. My only gripe in this regard is how slow you walk, but heck, he's walking in iron boots, I shouldn't complain. While this mine is still pretty linear, I don't think it's quite as linear as the Forest Temple, though you're still finding people and that's the main drive for making your way through. As soon as you think the Iron Boots puzzles start to get a little stale though, the game throws its mini-boss at you in the form of Dongoro, a Goron guard who's not completely clear on who you are and what you're doing in the mines. Upon almost killing the poor dude, he realises his mistake and lets you through to the next room. The room that houses the item of this dungeon, the Hero's Bow. Only a few puzzles use the bow, but it's still a nice inclusion, and it felt great getting the bow really early on for once. Something we're not really that used to in Zelda games for some reason. The anime variety in this dungeon is also great. A ton of fire-based creatures. A shame about the Dodongo design, but let's move on before other Zeldatubers start being sad about that design too. After a really great dungeon, we move on to the boss. Set in a giant room, you're poised to fight Virus. It's the only boss in the game to have only one phase, but it's still pretty fun. Grab his chains, pull him down, rinse and repeat. It feels much more like a boss from Shadow of the Colossus or something like that, but it is fun. With that, the fused shadow is taken off of Virus, whose form changes, revealing him to actually be Darbus, the Goron Patriarch, someone who'd been missing for a little while now. With this, Link cured the relationship between the Hylians and the Gorons, and he picks up his second piece of the fused shadow. Overall, I'd say this dungeon gets around about the right amount of praise. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it's a fun romp and I find myself wanting to come back to it pretty darn often. Okay, a lot happens in this section, so I'm just going to condense it a whole lot. Link's then directed to go down to Lake Hylia, an area to the west of Castletown in the Wii U version of the game. Then you're treated to doing the final one of the 3 most annoying Wolf Link sections of the game. To me, this is probably the most tedious since it can involve you doing a lot of backtracking, but that could just be a skill issue on my end since I'm not as good at finding the ones in this area. Thank the Lord I don't have to bring these sections up again though, because I really do dislike them personally. They're a cool way of showcasing the area before you get to properly explore it, but it's not necessary. After this, we're then treated to a horrifying clip, giving us more context to the world of Hyrule. It does a good job of that, showing us how the interlopers became the Twilight, and giving us a much more symbolic way of showing things rather than outright telling us everything. Something that fits the lore of something happening countless years ago. After gaining news that the Zora Queen's son, and so the heir to the Zora, is injured from the soul of the Queen herself, Link sets off to Castletown, where the child supposedly is lying waiting for help. As Link opens the door to Telma's bar, he likely didn't expect what was on the other side. A professor stating that the Zora anatomy isn't his specialty, followed by a childhood friend in Ilia walking around the bar. Stunned, Link walks around seemingly asking for answers. Telma tells him that she's lost her memory and would fit in with the kids at Kakariko Village, since they're all from Ordon Village, but that she needs an escort and the Hylian Knights aren't man enough for the task, further emphasised through their actions. Now I love this cutscene. It shows us how much courage this incarnation of the hero has, better than most of the cutscenes in this game or in the series, since he accepts without a second thought. After a troubling ride to Kakariko Village, which I don't really have much to say about, since it is just a protect the carriage mission, it's okay I guess. After some heartfelt character moments between characters such as Reynardo and Telma, along with Link and Colin, Link sees a vision of the Zora Queen telling him where to find something that will aid him on his journey ahead. She leads him to King Zora's grave and leaves some tear-jerking words for Link to leave to her son. And again, I just love the world building. The Zelda team could have got away with less, but they didn't, and they put the effort into their different characters and races in this game. With that, she leaves Link with Zora armor and a newfound sense of determination. He stops off at the bomb shop in Kakariko to get some water bombs and head back to Lake Hylia. Lake Hylia is really cool in this game, possibly the coolest we've ever seen for the location in the series if you count all of the stuff under the water. After everything he's been through, it is time to take the final piece of the fused shadow. He blows a hole to the entrance of the temple, and so begins Lakebed Temple. Hands down my favourite water dungeon in the 3D set of games, and almost no doubt in my mind the best water dungeon in the series in my opinion. Unsettling music roams free, and Link is all the way underwater with no real backup apart from Midna. For some people, this could be the scariest dungeon in the series, just down to this basically being a giant underwater cave on the bottom of a lake, especially since a ton of this dungeon is set underwater too. This game truly has the best underwater exploration of any other Zelda game in my opinion. Skyward Sword has better options for underwater traversal, but these areas are just so great. I personally rank this dungeon just a little above the Goron Mines, but not by much. It is still around that middle section. Enemy variety is fantastic as usual. All of these foes are crafted really well for the environment, and that enhances the dungeon. This temple also reuses the idea of water level, but does it better than previous versions in my opinion, with the water slide that can take Link down anytime he wants whenever he changes the flow of water. These puzzles are more complicated than the others so far in my experience, and I just have more fun with these puzzles in general. So I'm speaking very highly of this temple, so what brings it down? Both the mini-boss and the boss are pretty forgettable, or just not fun. The item is really cool though, as you'd expect since it is the first of 2 claw shots, though it's still not overly fun, if I'm honest. So yeah, I love the traversal and puzzles in this dungeon. Seriously, I love being underwater in games, and this game does it perfectly. I've never had such a cool balance of fear and tension than I had through underwater parts of this temple. Though some sections just let it down a little bit, with the backtracking if you end up doing something wrong, plus Morpheal is just a really simple boss that isn't really that fun apart from the epicness factor, which is a big one. But after a pretty darn good dungeon, Link collects his third and final fused shadow, and Midna opens up a portal to leave, feeling fantastic and ready to use the shadow on the usurper King Zant. They both teleport to the same place that the Light Spirit had talked to them just a couple of real hours ago. Feeling proud that he's finally accomplished his mission, Link smiles, turns around and can feel success just around the corner. The whole of Hyrule saved. There wasn't much to do now, just get to the Mirror of Twilight and take the fight to the king himself. As Link turns around, a horror sweeps his face, as a familiar black cloak lay in front of him. Link standing head to head with the usurper king himself, Zant. While I'm not as creative as some people with their imagination with an imp, shall we say, I think Midna is possibly the greatest written character in the Zelda series. Midna drained of all of her energy, and as Midna had to you much earlier in the game at this point, you need to save her. But before we talk about the climb up to Hyrule Castle itself, I think we need to talk about Midna a little more up until this point. There's a reason why Midna's name hasn't come up much in the last couple episodes of this series. Speaking of, make sure to go and check those episodes out before watching this one to get up to speed, and this series is going to be regular till at least February monthly, so sub to not miss the next episode. So just a heads up, I'm going to be talking about Midna as a whole, including what's revealed of her at the end of Twilight Princess, so if that doesn't sound like what you want, click off when you've got up to where you want to be. At the beginning of the game, and to our knowledge, Midna is literally a nobody. Out of the kindness of her heart, she decides that letting you out of your cell at the bottom of Hyrule Castle can only benefit both of you, but will mostly benefit her. She sees herself as the protagonist of this story, something that makes complete and utter sense since she is the rightful ruler of her people. She isn't looking to save the light world at this point in the story. I think the Zelda team did a really good job at making the player kinda hate Midna at the beginning of the game. She's arrogant, annoying at times, but not annoying in the way that Fi was annoying. She's not annoying because she pops up all the time at all. And I mean, that in of itself is purely amazing. And Zelda Breath of the Wild, I think there are only 2 Zelda games that had companions that felt like they weren't constantly monitoring you. Those 2 companions were the King of Red Lions and, in my opinion, Midna. She shows up when she needs to, or when she needs to explain something that should be explained. There definitely are still times where you'll come across something Midna says and sit there like, well yeah, I know that, but thanks, I guess. But it doesn't happen nearly as much as with Navi or Fi in particular. Usually for a Zelda companion, this would probably be everything you'd actually be able to write about. They have some amount of backstory and, well, are they annoying? I'm planning on eventually doing these series for every single game in the series, or at least the 3D games, and I know I couldn't make whole videos on any of the other companions personally. The only other companion I think deserves its own video that I might actually give him one day is actually Lament. But that's a discussion for a whole other day. Over the course of the start of the game, Midna shows off her feelings of the light world a few times. Midna doesn't directly hate the world above, she probably just feels some amount of jealousy down to her people not being treated quite as nicely as the Hylians and the numerous other races living outside of the Twilight. The light world even uses the Twilight as a realm to lock very dangerous criminals away, for Pete's sake. Midna is rightfully pretty annoyed at how these races have treated her people in the past, and I feel like that is understandable, though you are playing as Link, a member of the Light World. Plus, we don't know that Midna actually cares about the people living in the Twilight Realm till partway into the game anyway. So initially it really does feel like Midna just hates the inhabitants of the Light World for just the virtue of living in this realm as opposed to her realm, being spiteful rather than playing the princess who thinks her people deserve more. Now I think it's time to get to Midna's Lament, one of the greatest sections in a Zelda game for making you actually care about a character. That may have sounded like hyperbole, but it really wasn't in my opinion. Zelda games always have some section where things are at least slightly different, at least the linear 3D games do anyway, and heck, even Breath of the Wild does. Ocarina of Time has you captured by the Gerudo, Majora's Mask has the first 3 days, Wind Waker has the Forsaken Fortress the first time round, Skyward Sword has you losing all of your items at Eldin Volcano. Something is off with all of this. Midna's Lament is that section of the game for Twilight Princess, but instead of it being different to break up the gameplay loop you've experienced so far, it's different because it's trying to play out the story in a meaningful way that makes you actually care for the character rather than her kind of not having much of an arc and then having a lore relation at the end of the game and not much else. The Midna's Lament track is one of the best in Zelda history, even to this day. This used to be a go-to for my videos for a while because I was just so into the song. It plays into your emotions so well and kind of plays out its own little story in the notes. I'm not a music guy, so I won't sit here and pretend like I know what every note is in writing and make a deep dive onto the music, but it does sound nice to listen to, that's for sure. It also really fits the personality of Midna in my eyes, or it is? At this point in the game, Midna is a pain, don't get it twisted, but she is starting to reform in small ways. She has more banter with Link, or at least as much banter as you can get back from a brick wall anyway. And she seems to be warming up to the hero slowly but surely. After a really long and convoluted climb to the top of Hyrule Castle in the hopes that Zelda can save the Twilight Princess, Midna tells Zelda that Link is the one that will save her land, and that Zelda has to save Link since he's just been turned into a wolf, presumably for the rest of his life. Midna is literally half dead on the floor on the brink of demise, and she asks the princess to save Link instead, a gesture that doesn't go unnoticed for the rest of the game, as we'll discuss in future episodes. Zelda seems to have been thinking about Midna over the time she's been gone, and seems to know the true identity of the imp, and realises that everything that's happening to the Light World and the Twilight right now is a product of the Hylians and their insistence to seal away a villain into the Twilight Realm. Zelda uses the rest of her power to bring Midna back up, and to give her the energy she needs to finish her journey, and ultimately keep living, with the ultimate cost of Zelda's life. Zelda told Link and Midna to find the sword that seals the darkness in the Sacred Grove. Past this point, Midna only becomes more and more friendly with the idea that not everyone in the world of light is bad, and stops seeing Link like a tool so she can help her people, and more like an ally, a friend that could actually help both of them get exactly what they want, which is to free both worlds from the tyrant Zant. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to talk about the Sacred Grove today, and neither would I really want to. The thing is, I want to talk about that when we get later into the series, since it does play a pretty pivotal role in what I think of the Temple of the Time and that whole area. And just kind of the whole theme around that area, I won't deep dive into that stuff today, but I will say this, there aren't many puzzles in Zelda games that genuinely annoy me, and these gosh darn Guardian puzzle-like things in Twilight Princess will be the death of me. And one of those Guardian puzzles is literally one of the things you have to do to actually progress in this game. The first time I saw that I had to do this puzzle, I screamed a little internally. I'm really stubborn with puzzles like this too, so I didn't want to just search it up and be done with it, which made the whole ordeal far worse at the end of the day. Which is kind of funny, because even on a replay I won't search up the puzzle, and every single time I feel like a bumbling idiot. Point is though, after that ridiculously long tangent, I think it does a good job at summing up the journey so far. The beginning of Twilight Princess is not perfect by any means, I will fully admit that. Even being someone who seems to enjoy the opening far more than most people, the journey has been arduous. But the satisfaction of finishing each dungeon, and the satisfaction of going through a fire and water temple that are actually really good, and knowing you have a whole lot of game left on a first playthrough, is such a good feeling. Link walks into the room, or place, field, I guess, and picks up the Master Sword. Making for one of the most epic and just plain cool scenes in the series. Cool music and a companion by your side who will help you to the very end. There were some doubts that Midna would be of help, or if she'd be too much help like some other companions, but I think Midna strikes a perfect balance. I could probably talk about just her for longer, but I'll mention her more in future episodes. As Link turns to exit the grove as a human, being able to switch from wolf to human for the first time, the heroes make their way to the best couple of dungeons in the game. Usually we do the whole build up to the dungeon and everything, but I've just got to come out and say it. Arbiter's Grounds is my favourite dungeon in the Legend of Zelda series. I don't think that's the hottest take by any stretch of the imagination either. Before I became a Zelda-tuber myself, I saw a lot of people who thought very similarly. And yet another take that is pretty mild and would probably be accepted by a load of you watching is that Snowpeak Ruins is also in my top 3 dungeons of all time too. Today I want to talk at least a little bit about each of them. This retrospective series so far has basically been me talking through the game up until this point, and even all of the plot points one by one. I won't be doing that so much this video or really next because I truly just want to get into just talking about the dungeons. This part of Twilight Princess, this 5 or so hour section, is probably my favourite part of the entire series. So let's talk a little bit about Arbiter's Grounds and why I love this place so much. I feel like I get a pass for talking about stuff that I'd usually talk about this time. Atmosphere is possibly my #1 necessity when it comes to a Zelda dungeon personally. Even outside of Twilight Princess, the game I think has the thickest atmosphere of all the titles in the series. A game like Ocarina of Time can create a dungeon that feels like it was almost crafted entirely for me. The atmosphere in the Shadow Temple is almost unrivaled, same for the Forest Temple too. It's the reason why Ocarina of Time might be the next game I do a retrospective series on in a year's time or a few, whatever. Back to the point at hand though. Arbiter's Grounds doesn't have the best atmosphere in the series, but it's pretty far up there. This is mostly due to the backstory of this place, that you only learn right after the dungeon, but it still really hits hard after you first see it. It's one of the few places in the series where we actually get to see what took place before the events of the game, not counting Breath of the Wild. This was the birthplace of the plot of Twilight Princess. This is the same location that Ganondorf would have been locked up for a while in before having his verdict ultimately be that he'd be banished to the Twilight Realm. And even though this cutscene is just after the dungeon, this cutscene still just goes so insanely hard. Ganondorf actually kills a sage while they try and lock him away, something we've never seen him canonically do in front of our eyes, cementing how much of a badass this incarnation of Ganondorf was, or is, if Tears of the Kingdom's Ganondorf is still somehow the same person, which is a topic for a completely different day in a few months. Not to mention, at this point in the game, it's at least supposed to be a secret that Ganondorf is going to be the big bad guy. So I think it gives some weight to how powerful Zant supposedly might be, being able to overrun a once thriving prison and turning it into something more sinister, something more like a prison for the good. I actually think this is a good segue into talking about Zant a little bit more. He's one of the few Zelda villains that you can really kinda get behind if you try and see his viewpoint. He just wants his realm to be treated fairly, he's just going about it in the wrong way. In that way, Zant is actually quite a lot similar to Ganondorf in Wind Waker, possibly the best incarnation of the big bad. I'll probably talk about him a little more at the end of the series, but I do enjoy him as a character. Plus, he was Girahim before Girahim was a thing. I can get behind that for sure. I actually think, and I don't think this is a hot take, that Zant is far more imposing than Girahim, but I guess that was kind of the vibe they were going for. Anyway, back to Arbiter's Grounds, the soundtrack has no ounce of hope in it. In fact, it's barely noticeable. And when you want something to be truly atmospheric in a 3D space, similarly to Breath of the Wild, you want the music to blend in with the environment just perfectly. Or not at all. You can't be somewhere in the middle, you have to be all in on either side, and the soundtrack does this dungeon justice, I think. It's not a catchy tune or anything, just ambient sounds that blend together to make something that's almost just scary to listen to. That's fitting because this is probably the scariest place in the game. Even on the lead up to the grounds themselves, you're shot out of a cannon, with seemingly no way to get back to the only area in the map where you haven't been yet, Gerudo Desert. You fight an entire Bokoblin camp and have another fight with the best mini-boss in the series, in my opinion. This place is scary because it's the unknown. As I've said before, I'm no expert when it comes to design. I'm nothing like my friend Captain Bergerson, so I won't do a comprehensive dive into what makes the dungeon itself perfect, because maybe it's not what it's cracked out to be in design. I don't know. But compared to most dungeons in the series, I just love the puzzles here. I'm usually not a fan of desert-like themes and stuff like that, but knowing the backstory of this place and that the Gerudo Desert is the birthplace of Ganondorf, it just excites me. It makes me want to keep exploring, to keep the hunt going. Plus, the spinner is probably my single favourite item in the game, even if it's criminally underused. Despite not being down for the theme of a desert usually, having that with a backstory that makes sense in the world of Twilight Princess was great. Plus, the enemies fit that theme perfectly along with the pose. Speaking of which, the enemy variety is great in Arbiter's Grounds, and that includes the boss, the next thing that we need to talk about. Star-Lord is my favourite boss in the series, as will probably come to the surprise of pretty much no one. Monk Koshia is the only other boss that even comes close to that same level in my opinion. Like I said before, the spinner is amazing, and I probably won't ever forgive the developers for its underuse in future dungeons and stuff, but the use of the spinner in the Star-Lord fight gives the fight a gravitas that I personally don't think many bosses in the entire series have. Plus, with the general theme of Twilight Princess being so much more epic in scale than most of the other Zelda games, it all fits together to make a boss fight where fighting a giant undead creature with a Beyblade is an amount of fun that cannot be understated, and in my opinion is one of the top 3 bosses in the series almost objectively. As much as I love this place, I don't have much else to say. I think it does a great job with its puzzles and is one of the most grounded areas in the entire game, and probably, once again, I know I keep saying it, but the series, with puzzles being heavily linked to the prison setting and the ruins of that prison. It ends off with that great cutscene of Ganondorf the first time in the game, hinting at his return later, and where you'll be assembling the pieces of the Mirror of Twilight. Not to mention, this is when you'll realise you'll likely be going into the Twilight Realm at some point in the game, something that got me very hyped for the end of the game the first time round. The theme is great, the boss is great, the puzzles are great, the item is great, the mini-boss, Death Sword, is fantastic, and might have one of the coolest backstories of a boss. I won't get into that today because I could talk about that for a while. It's highly regarded as one of the best dungeons in the series. What is there not to love? Apart from those rat enemies that you can only see in wolf form, because good lord, they are truly very annoying, even if they do fit in with the ghost and the prison themes and stuff. Oh. Next we venture into my favourite area in Twilight Princess, and probably the entire series in terms of atmosphere. Pure and simple. We head to the first area where we'll be taking our first piece of the Mirror of Twilight. We head over to Snowpeak Ruins. True story time. I just finished Snowpeak Ruins a few years ago. The memory of first completing this dungeon is still fairly fresh in the back of my mind, and I actually remember very vividly, after completing this section of the game, I had dreams solely backed by the song that plays when you're trudging your way through this desolate snow wasteland. It's a track that elicits emotions that I think only the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time can inflict. The track hammers it home that nobody is nearby. It's a very ambient track with little hints of the outside world peeking in whilst it plays, with small taps of an instrument being the bulk of the song. It's one of the most ambient tracks in the series in my opinion, and probably the most ambient tracks that were born before Breath of the Wild released. Linear Zelda games' atmosphere hadn't been much better than they were in Snowpeak Ruins. Now that I'm somewhat done about talking about the atmosphere, I think it's a good time to move on to the puzzles themselves. In the series as a whole, I've never been big into the snow or ice themed dungeons. They've just never really done it for me, with the only exception being Snowhead and Majora's Mask in my opinion. I know a lot of people like all of the ice places in the series, especially in the 2D games, but I've never gelled with them quite as much as other people. That being said, Snowpeak Ruins created something that was more than I could have ever expected. Wandering through this mostly abandoned mansion with items more befitting of a castle lacing the walls both inside and out, and while I've never loved ice-based puzzles either, I think they also work great in Snowpeak, especially after acquiring the item of the dungeon, but we'll get onto that later. There are a couple of block puzzles that I can definitely admit can be tedious, but I'm also glad that they aren't the same sliding block puzzles that we've come to expect. The added element of the ice does keep the dungeon feeling unique up until the very end. This is probably the most linear of all the temples in the game, except for maybe the Forest Temple. The first half of this section has you wandering through the mansion, searching for ingredients for a soup that Yetta is making for Yetta, since she's feeling sick. It can be annoying going somewhere, then not getting the ingredient you needed, and repeating the process a few times, but it does build up to something that amasses by the end of the ruins. Speaking of, the rundown to get to the ruins is amazing, sliding all the way down from the top of Snowpeak, and following Yetta on his way. Hylians seem to be scared of the big bad creature that lives on top of the mountain, but in the end, the big bad is actually just a dude who has a wife and likes to slide. I don't know, in a game that's atmosphere can often be dishearteningly oppressive at times, I think it was great to see an expectation subversion like that for a minor character. It adds a certain charm. It's the reason why people also like the demon Batrao in Skyward Sword. There are also some canon puzzles within the dungeon, and I think that these are pretty cool. Though I think the best I've seen puzzles have been crafted with the ball and chain in mind. But again, before we talk about the item itself, what about that mini-boss? Fighting what looks to have been a soldier of the supposed army of Snowpeak and beating them after a pretty tough fight, all things considered, is a thing of pure ecstasy and is one of my personal favourite mini-bosses in the game, along with Death Sword. The ball and chain is also one of my favourite items in the game, and it's also underutilised down to how many places in Twilight Princess actually have ice scattered around. Nevertheless, the weight you can actually feel on Link's shoulder when using this item is unrivaled, and you really do feel like you can do some damage with it, which is absolutely correct. You can do a ton of damage with it, especially if you're going to play through the Cave of Ordeals. Would never have gotten through that without this trusty beauty. Finally, we get to another scary scene for a first playthrough. Yetta turning into Blitzetta is pretty scary, even though it's been hinted at that she's got an illness and isn't feeling like herself. There's something about the sort of twitching she has going on that just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Seeing that transformation the first time gave me a real big fright. Honestly, sad I can't have that same experience watching that cutscene again. The fight with Blitzetta itself is fine. I don't think it's amazing, but I do think it's really cool in scale and adds to how epic Twilight Princess is on the whole. Plus, any excuse to use the ball and chain is a very good excuse in my book. Then a heartwarming scene between the Yetis takes place, and you just have to stand there and watch. God, makes my blood boil just thinking of all the happy couples. Ugh. But let's get back on track. Link picks up his first loose piece of the Mirror of Twilight, and one of my favourites to pick up. I liked Twilight Princess up to this point, but this is when I started to love the game on my first playthrough, and that love has only grown over time. First being shot into Gerudo Desert and entering Arbiter's grounds, first sledding down Snowpeak and entering Snowpeak Ruins. They will be two memories that don't soon go away. Those memories will likely stick with me forever. Time travel is done time and time again in the Legend of Zelda series. To be honest, sometimes I forget just how often the series strays into that territory. Every single 3D Zelda game has time manipulation of some sort, whether it be through a traditional time machine, through abilities like stasis, or just being elements of the overall narrative. Twilight Princess uses it in a very different and pretty strange way. But before we get into our next dungeon, I think it's time to bring the linearity of Twilight Princess into question. Skyward Sword is often criticised for being far too linear, and I think in some ways, Twilight Princess selling so well and being received so well cemented even more linearity as the direction that the series wanted to take in the late 2000s. But as we know now, it didn't really last for as long as they probably thought narrative-only experiences would. I am one of those people who is fairly critical of the linearity of Skyward Sword, so why do I give Twilight Princess a pass? The problem with the surface design in the former is that everything is designed like a dungeon. In Faron, Eldin and Lineru, you'll be doing everything in a set order, and largely you'll be finding these areas in the exact same order in every subsequent playthrough that you have. Now, that inherently isn't a problem. The problem I see a lot of people have is that the second set of dungeons in the game are in the same areas, but again, in theory, this is great. Going through the same areas in different ways can make for some great world building. The world design is so linear that I'd found any interesting mysteries around each of the regions really early on, and so there was nothing else to really surprise me the second time around. With the exception of the Sand Sea in Lineru, I'd say, I kinda like that area. Plus, the world building on the surface in Skyward Sword just wasn't the greatest overall in my eyes. So the reason I say all of this is that Twilight Princess is similar, right? For the final 5 or 6 dungeons in the game, you're technically re-exploring areas you've explored in the past. But the reason why I think this is done better is because, as an example, Gerudo Desert is technically an entire expansion onto Lake Hylia. Snowpeak is a huge expansion onto the Zora River, and the other 3 dungeons we're talking about today function very differently to adding more expansions to the map. Instead of expanding on the world, getting into these dungeons requires an expansion in your knowledge of the lore of this Hyrule, since we'll be going beyond Hyrule. For the Temple of Time, you're heading back in time. Instead of an expansion of the map, this dungeon gives you a feel of this Hyrule sometime in the past. The City in the Sky has you learning about the Uka tribe and why they seem to be dotted around Hyrule, and while they still remain a mystery to this day, their inclusion in the era of Twilight still offers lore opportunities and questions today as well. And we get a good look at their culture in the form of the City in the Sky. And the Palace of Twilight is literally everything we've been building up to, and doesn't just serve as a dungeon, it was once used, and still is, technically, as an actual palace for the Twilight. A set of people you've had a minimal contact with up until that point in the game. Linearity aside, there isn't really that much to discuss when it comes to the gameplay at this stage in the game outside of the dungeons. There's a little side activity before heading into the City in the Sky, but for the Temple of Time, there's not too much. Make your way to the end of the Sacred Grove, do some little bits of stuff, and now you've unlocked the magic that is time travel. What did I say? Time travel is used a lot in this series. Let's get into the dungeon itself. I know a lot of people who think that the Temple of Time is the best or near best in the series, and this is actually a viewpoint that I don't completely understand personally. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's bad, I just think it's good. The mini-boss is one of my favourites in the entire series, if not my favourite in the form of a Dark Nut. For me, they are the pinnacle of design in the Zelda series. They fit the tone of Twilight Princess perfectly, they're not too easy that they can actually just be breezed through, and they offer a decent challenge. Plus, you're rewarded for actually getting some side bits, which doesn't happen very often in the 3D games, unless we're talking about heart pieces. Your time with the Dark Nuts will be made significantly easier the more sword skills that you have. So the more sword skills that you have, the more you feel like a badass, and in a game that presents itself in such an epic way like this game does, small touches like that mean a lot, they mean the world. I mean, there's a reason why this fight with the Dark Nut is on the back of the box. Puzzle design wise, I've never been the biggest fan of the Dominion Rod and puzzles specifically designed around that idea. It's just not my cup of tea. It's definitely clever though, so I guess it gets some points there. Funnily enough, after talking about how linearity doesn't affect me in Twilight Princess for a couple of minutes at the top of this episode, I can't lie to you and say that the design of this one does it for me, because if I'm being completely honest, it doesn't, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. If you tuned into the last episode, or you're watching the full retrospective in all of its glory, you know that I would sing the praises of Snowpeak Ruins until the sun came up if I could. So why do I give one really linear dungeon a pass, but not another? Well, I think it actually comes back to that exact same design philosophy as Skyward Sword, weirdly enough. I'm not someone who likes going through clear corridors to get to an area at the end, and I'll give the Zelda team credit here. Getting the Dominion Rod at the top of the temple and going back down in a different way is a cool idea. It just didn't land for me as much as it did with other people, clearly, but I can understand why others love it too. Whereas in contrast to that, Snowpeak Ruins has that linear design, but there are more open areas to explore. To me personally, it feels more lived in than it does to explore the Temple of Time, and I think that really matters to me with some of my favourite dungeons in this game. I can't even really imagine people walking around the Temple of Time. Goron Mines absolutely feels like a mine forged by the Gorons. Lakebed Temple feels like it once would have been used by the Zora. Arbiter's Grounds has the vibe and design of an old prison, and Snowpeak Ruins is a mansion that was once used to protect a garrison. I am very much about the feel of a dungeon, and the Temple of Time, while in the opening stages I can definitely see it being used for its intended purposes, in the end I can't see the rest being used for anything at all. It's just there to pad out the dungeon. That being said, I still think the atmosphere is great for what's going on and is one of the strongest points that I have going for the temple. I mean, I'm not sure if it is the same since I haven't brushed up on the lore for a while, but the Temple of Time in this game looks a lot like the temple of the same name in Ocarina of Time, and that just expands on the atmosphere. It takes me back to when I last played Ocarina of Time and how I'm almost carrying on that adventure that I left behind in the era of time. I also don't really like the baby Gomas in the Temple of Time at all. For me, they're more annoying than anything, especially in that one room with the lift, though I will say it's really satisfying to squash them later on with the statues, so maybe I'll chalk that one off. Apart from that, I don't really have much to say about the Temple of Time. One day I'm sure I'll delve into the lore of every dungeon in the series for videos, so I'll leave that one for another time since I imagine this has a lot to delve into, which leaves us with the boss. Now, I hate spiders more than anything else in the world. The thought of a tarantula makes my skin crawl and makes my eyeballs want to grow legs of their own and crawl away. Truly, I hate them. But that's why fighting them in video games is so amazing. It gives me an outlet to get over my fear, and I think in a way it's worked. In recent years I've gotten over my fear of spiders far more than I think I would have if I didn't play games, which sounds like an odd game theory experiment or something. But the point is that I think Armagoma, like the vast majority of the bosses in Twilight Princess, absolutely nails how epic the fight is. It's not the hardest, but by virtue of being a giant spider, it makes it harder for me, and I guess other spider haters, to actually just fight the thing. But when you boil it down, this boss is a piece of piss. But it definitely has that feel that the rest of the bosses in this game have. After defeating that monstrosity, we move on to the next part of the main quest, helping Shad to decipher ancient script of an ancient civilization. Honestly, after Tears of the Kingdom, Shad just feels like Toro's nerdier younger brother, but anyway, let's get into it. The Shad quest is okay, I guess. It basically has you running through the map searching for various symbols around Hyrule. I don't dislike it, but I do think it's one of the low points of the game for me personally. The act of finding ancient text is cool when you're told that's what you're doing, but actually doing it just isn't for me. It has you exploring the world, finding owl statues, using the Dominion Rod, and resetting the statues to their original position, thus granting you another part of the missing word that Shad is trying to figure out. When I do my full retrospective and I stitch all of these videos together, I'm going to add a separate section for the world of Hyrule and these side quests. But I'll say that I am a big fan of this version of Hyrule, but by this point in the game, I've done my fair share of running around and trying to appease the golden goddesses. I'd rather just have a small thing to do in Kakariko Village and then get sent up to the city in the sky. That being said, I know many of you out there are big simps for Shad, so just know that I see you and I accept you wholeheartedly. Now we come to the city in the sky, and to be honest, this is probably the most mixed that I feel on a dungeon in this game. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like I might have said something about how the Forest Temple from the start of the game is only better than one other, but I might retract that statement now. The bulk of my thoughts on this dungeon is that atmospherically, it is a treat for both the eyes and the ears. Most of the stuff I love about Arbiter's Grounds and Snowpeak Ruins is present in City in the Sky. But in that same vein, most of the stuff that I feel is only okay in dungeons like the Temple of Time and Forest Temple is also present. Personally speaking, I think the City in the Sky has the least interesting puzzles and level design of any dungeon in the game. I think the problem in this regard is more so to do with the fact that the actual look, lore and feel of the city is so good that it makes the comparatively pretty meh puzzles feel much more lackluster than they really are. I think one of the main reasons why it can feel like that sometimes to me is that for the first half of the dungeon, you're mostly using the claw shot, right? That's all good. The claw or hook shot is one of the cooler items in the series for sure. But when the entire item for the dungeon is a second claw shot, I just don't find the puzzles that interesting because I've already been using that item for the last 20 minutes before getting a second one of that same item. Now, I won't downplay how cool it feels to zip around using 2 claw shots. Even before I'd completed Twilight Princess for the first time, I wanted the double claw shots. But in practice, they can make for some pretty tedious design. Usually the extent of a double claw shot puzzle will be to claw onto something and then wait for something to come closer to you, zip over to something else quickly. I'm not saying this is bad by any means, since I don't think any single dungeon in this game is bad, but I do think the level design of the city in the sky is just dull. Nothing less. That's enough of my negativity though, because it's time to lump some positivity on the city in the sky. The atmosphere is insanely good for this area. It's actually one of the first times that I think the Zelda series cracked the Breath of the Wild atmosphere before that game released. The music isn't that memorable in my eyes, but that's not because it's bad. It just blends into the background so perfectly that I barely recognise that it's there, much like a lot of the music in the last couple of titles. Along with that, we're exploring the city of an ancient race, of which a member or multiple members of that race have been found around the hero over the course of the story. That makes the drive to explore the area way higher. Unless there's a reason I've missed, it is a little strange that this place had residents. Like, where do or did you live? In this little area behind a rotating platform? But barring that, it's very interesting thematically. Plus, I've always been an enjoyer of the simple concept of falling from a high place. In every single game with a very tall object, the first thing I like to do is go to the top of that tall object and jump off it. Something about that process is very satisfying to me, I don't know why. I even did it with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, so having that be the challenge of most of this dungeon is great. The mini-boss is an Erelphos, and it's pretty good. Simple again, but it's set out more like a duel with a soldier instead of fighting a beast, and I like that about this mini-boss personally. It's an in-between of why I like the Dark Nuts versus other beast-like enemies. The boss of this area is definitely one of the most talked about in Twilight Princess in my experience online, Argorok, and I think once again that's mostly because of the spectacle. I do like the use of the claw shots in this area more than I do for puzzles though. Zipping from one pea hat to the next is a whole lot of fun, especially when you're trying to get behind the boss as fast as possible. Plus, Link stabbing what is basically a miniature dragon from behind is so insanely cool. There's not too much behind the design of the actual fight, but again, the design of the boss is very much on point. With that, I don't think there's much more to say about the city in the sky. Overall, I find the puzzles unremarkable enough that I don't have too much to say, though if I was to praise one other part of the dungeon, there's that one section where you're hooking all around different walls and the walls aren't moving, and for some reason, I always remember this section way more than the rest. I don't know why, but I guess I just like that section. It releases the nice piece of dopamine that the rest of the city in the sky doesn't do for me personally. Unremarkable, but for me, I can see why someone might enjoy it way more than me. We grab the final piece of the Mirror of Twilight, and we move onwards once more to Zant. Passing through the mirror to get to the Palace of Twilight is one of my favourite moments in a Zelda game, period. We'll talk about the overall quality of the dungeon in a minute, but simply passing into a new realm of being in a 3D space is very surreal. Up until Twilight Princess, there had been instances of outright travelling to other realms, but we'd never really seen it in a 3D title. Ocarina of Time had you going forwards or backwards in time. Majora's Mask probably had you going through some kind of different realm or something, but it's never really outright stated. Wind Waker had another time travelling section, but that was it. Majora's Mask is, and probably will always be, the weirdest Zelda game in terms of themes, and the moon as an area is very strange. But personally, the Palace of Twilight is the most unknown and, dare I say, scariest location in the entire series personally, barring maybe the depths, and it's because nothing in this area is as it should be. Whereas in the moon in Majora's Mask, there's a hint of normalcy. The sky is still blue, there's a big ass tree, grass is growing. The palace isn't like that at all. There are floating lands where otherworldly people might live. There are members of the Twilight that physically can't function as normal members of society because of Zant and someone else's meddling. You're placed in the middle of a completely unknown territory. Legitimately, the best comparison I can make to how Link would be feeling in this situation is, well, imagine if you were raiding a castle with your comrades back in the, I don't know what year. The enemy knows you're coming, and you're the first one into the middle of the castle. That is exactly how Link would be feeling if he wasn't the most courageous bastard you ever did see. Being honest, it's been so long since I first started up this series that I can't remember what I have or haven't said about the atmosphere of areas overridden with the Twilight, but I can say that atmospherically they're my favourite areas in the franchise. Honestly, most of the areas in the Twilight are fairly tedious, I will fully admit, but because of the time period that I first played this game, and because of my genuine pure love for the story and the idea of exploring realms, these areas do it for me. They scare me in-game, but then they also give me safety in real life, since this is my comfort game. It's a strange thing, but it's a nice reminder that not everything is black and white, and that nuance is a thing. So it should go without saying that the Palace of Twilight basically being the birth pod for all of that atmosphere means that I do have some bias for it, because the actual dungeon in of itself has some pretty hit or miss puzzles. Some can be tedious, but for some reason, in this case, those tedious sections are what I like. Getting a ball back to a pedestal before a giant floating technological hand grabs it can be tedious, but it gives me just that right amount of pressure and stress that I'm trying to run back as far as my little legs will let me, but I just can't go any faster. But the hand is gaining on me and I just can't, you get the point. The tension is something I like about some older Zelda dungeons that I don't think newer ones have nailed down just yet. This seems like a good time to talk about the enemies in this area. Most of them are just the Twilight enemies you've come to expect at this point, but I think that works in the dungeon's favour because I find myself being reminded of how weak I was at the start of my journey through the light versus how strong I am now and how easy it is to obliterate a lot of these enemies with the Master Sword. Going back to the structure, I like the idea of going from one building to the next to the centre. That gives me happy feelings personally. I like it. It's another thing I don't have a reason for, but I do like it. I guess I like seeing my progress clearly outlined, and that is a very clear way of showing it. Oh, and then dude, then there's the section where you imbue light into the Master Sword to slash down darkness in the coolest fashion possible. I remember first playing this dungeon and thinking that was the coolest thing ever. The rest of the Palace of Twilight isn't much to write home about, honestly. The puzzles from then on are mostly traversal based, and they're pretty decent. It's nice being able to free the citizens of the Twilight from the Twilight. It's also nice knowing that this probably makes Midna happy, and at this point in the game, that is all I'm thinking about. The two stars of the show here are definitely the atmosphere and the boss. The mini-boss Phantom Zant is a nice callback to Phantom Ganons of old, but nothing more. The real Zant though, his boss is a whole trip and is probably my favourite in the franchise specifically for making you use your entire item set to beat him. Overall, there are better bosses. Even in this game there's one that's better, but I think the old formula of boss design needing you to use an item to open up a boss, but I think that was perfected in this fight against Zant. It's basically a gauntlet versus the Usurper King, going through a ton of areas you've already played through thus far, and using items that you first acquired in those areas. And he takes quite a few hits to take down. He's given you these big memory hits of your journey thus far and how it's all led up to this. You take the last swing of your sword, Zant falls to the ground, but you're reminded of what the Twilight King said before the fight begun. He ran into Ganondorf the Demon King when he was locked in this realm by the sages, meaning that he was using Zant as a stepping stone and would likely already be in Hyrule while Link is still in the Twilight Realm. Midna blasts a tiny fraction of her ancestors' magic at Zant and basically destroys the poor lad. With this victory and the fact that the Fused Shadow can be used to great effect, the duo step back outside of the Twilight Realm, and they move closer towards their next and final task, Ganondorf, who would be laying in wait of the hero of Hyrule and the Twilight Princess. Hyrule Castle is one of the most used locations in the entire series. Sure, we moved to Termina, Holodrum, Labrynna, and a few other locations over the course of the timeline, but Hyrule Castle is possibly the most reused area in the series, and that's down to the game's inherent nature. This is The Legend of Zelda. You'd expect the Princess of Hyrule to have a part to play in most of, if not all of these games. Something else that has been done in the past and after Twilight Princess is using Hyrule Castle, or a darkened version of it, as a dungeon. Oftentimes the final dungeon of any given game. In the 3D games, the trope has most notably been used in Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom now, though that's less of a final dungeon. But I've got to be honest, it's taken a good few years for me to finally warm up to this place, and it's probably a reason why I love the game so much at the moment. Hyrule Castle in Twilight Princess is my favourite end dungeon of any Zelda game, though Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle comes damn close. Today we talk about Hyrule Castle and its subsequent boss fights and why I believe it is the best finale in a Zelda game with only one other in Tears of the Kingdom that's even a contender in my eyes. But first, how did we get here? Well, as established at the end of The Palace of Twilight, the Fused Shadow is a strong son of a gun, so with that in mind, Midna uses this strength to penetrate the barrier surrounding the castle. This symbolises just how far she's come during this adventure. Near the beginning, she only views Link as a pet. On this journey, she's found friendship in Link, and has realised there is use and meaning to Hylian's lives. She is willing to risk her life with the interloper's power for the people she would have thought to be lower than her before. It's a great way of showing a progression that we'll be talking a bit more about later on. For a second though, before we get into the courtyard, I want to talk about the placement of this game's Hyrule Castle and why it is so much more than I think it is in every other Zelda game barring the Era of Wilds. Hyrule Castle has a place in this world, and in times of hardship it is a beacon for those who have succumbed to the darkness. It is the beacon of hope that Princess Zelda inhabits, the protector of Hyrule. Until the very last second, the princess tried her best to help her people. Throughout the game you're tasked with returning to Castletown more than any other game. It's where Telma's Tavern is, one of the more interesting and just generally best locations in the game. It's where a lot of the best mini-games are too. For all intensive purposes, it is the hub for this rendition of Hyrule. For any of your needs in the middle to late game, you're likely to go back to Castletown, and that's by design. Despite Hyrule Castle actually being in danger, this little town full of people just living their lives aren't fazed by what's happening unless they're taken in by the Twilight. This town is your reprieve from everything that's going wrong. After a hard day's work in the Arbiter's grounds, you're likely to return here out of your own volition, not because the Temple of Time is in the area and you've just got to run through the town to make your way there. No, it's just so you can prepare for your journey ahead, and that's a feeling that isn't replicated much in the series, and isn't replicated with any other rendition of Castletown in my opinion. I think it's further exemplified with things like the crowd density. The crowds in this Castletown are unlike any in the series, so much so that the hero of Twilight, the protector of this version of Hyrule, wearing the garbs of the protectors of Hyrule's past, isn't even really noticed in this town. Maybe this is speculative, but I like to think that for Link, this is a reprieve from the attention that he gets as the chosen hero from pretty much everyone out and about. He's on a mission, but here, he gets to just be a person. And I think that's a very satisfying way to show somebody who might have something like imposter syndrome finally getting to have his moment of calm while he weathers the storm. Funnily enough, I called the first episode in this series The Calm Before the Storm, and if the first section of the game is that, then I like to think that Castletown is the calm during the storm. Or the calm whilst in the storm? Or the bunker your uncle made so that you'd survive a particularly bad storm. Either way, I think it's a perfect way to show this. So having all of that stripped away from you on this new lead up to Hyrule Castle that's been taken over by Ganondorf, I think that's a bloody genius move. Stripping the town of all of its inhabitants, weakening the hero emotionally before a battle, showing the true grandiose of this final battle. For me, this battle has more stakes than any other in the series, considering how relentless Ganondorf is at this point by basically sacrificing his stepping stone in Zant, and the fact that he's clawed his way back from a seemingly unchangeable fate. Well, all of that and we're not even in the courtyard. After Midna's heroics, the hero enters the giant double doors and spots that the castle's main building is locked. We'd never seen the courtyard of a 3D version of Hyrule Castle this overrun by chaos until Breath of the Wild. In Ocarina of Time, the courtyard is basically non-existent, while in other games like Wind Waker, the courtyard is more of a one-shot path to where you need to go. This courtyard is more lived in. You could imagine the groundskeepers tending to the grass and the decisions that would have been made to make it as aesthetically pleasing to visitors while still making it elegant in design. Apart from this, there's not much to say about the courtyard, to be honest. One thing to say about this dungeon as a whole is that a lot of the enemies you're fighting are villains that you'll recognise, and I think that's a great thing. You start off in the courtyard fighting bokoblins and Kargaroks. As you ascend through the floors of Hyrule Castle, you start to see more and more enemies you've come to expect as the game's gone on. Enemies like Dynalphos, Airalphos, Ghoulrats, Stalfos, Lizalfos, and Darknuts. The progression of enemies through this dungeon is a nice send-off for one of the 3D titles with the most enemies overall, but no send-off for a non-final boss enemy in this series has ever been as impactful as King Bulblin in my eyes. He's one of those characters that doesn't really say anything, and that's probably because he can't. His entire army is made up of bokoblins that chant at each other at most, and ignore each other at worst. The king has been defeated time and time again by Link, once on Eldin Bridge in a joust, once at the bridge above Lake Hylia, and once in one-on-one combat outside of the Arbiter's grounds, and even then he formed a trap for the hero, and Link still managed to escape. Link has managed to thwart the plans of Zant, Ganondorf, and King Bulblin throughout the entire game. By this point he's likely vanquished a very large portion of King Bulblin's army, especially in Hyrule Castle's courtyard, one of the most bokoblin heavy areas in the entire game. After defeating the king in yet another one-to-one sword fight, he realises something that he probably knew to some extent all along. He lifts the key to the castle. To show his respect, he musters up as many words as his English can carry him through. I follow the strongest side. That's all I've ever known. While it can be easy to label bokoblins, and especially King Bulblin, as evil in this game, are they the problem, or was it just the way that their system works as a species? If they're destined to follow the strongest side, can they be blamed for the sinister kidnapping of Colin, and everything else? That is a moral question for which I will leave to you, dear viewer. The rest of the courtyard offers some nice, smaller puzzles with items you've attained over your journey, but nothing of note particularly. More than anything, I think this section of the dungeon is used as a world building tool, for the Bokkos, for the castle, and for this legend. Opening the door to Hyrule Castle is a moment for me. I don't think this dungeon is one of the best in the game, considering I believe this game has the best dungeons in all of the series, but it ranks somewhere in the middle of the pack for me, which is still supremely good when held up to some others. Every single thing you've done has led up to this moment, and let us not forget, this is one of the longest traditional Zelda games out there if you're running through the story. When you play a game for long enough, no matter if you're indifferent on the game or if you love it, by the 25-hour mark you've usually found some amount of connection unless you've been playing over the course of half a year. This means that by the time I reach the conclusion of this game, I am definitely ready to beat Ganondorf's ass. That dude has somehow breezed his way through every single piece of adversity that's ever come his way, and I want to sit him down for good. Since I haven't been doing this for every other dungeon, I really don't feel like going through every single puzzle step by step for this one, especially seeing as we're reaching an epic conclusion here. But as I said, I think it's a good final dungeon. The enemies are well selected, the theme is done impeccably with the climb all the way up to the throne room of the castle, plus it's awesome to see pieces of armour that Hylian soldiers wear set up on armour stands. The Darknuts in particular are used really well as the climb gets tougher and tougher, since I find Darknuts in this game to be some of the hardest enemies in the entire series. I also really like that the castle isn't all set inside. It's probably a strange point to bring up, but having moments to catch your breath outside of the castle whilst also seeing how high up you've climbed through its chambers is nice and rewarding. Items are used really well in here too. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why I think it's probably the best final dungeon in the series. At some point in the castle, you'll be asked to use each item you've acquired through the game. One specific section of this dungeon I actually remember very fondly comes up in the final 5 minutes or so. As your climb nears its end, the castle becomes more and more ruined, making the staircases above completely unable to actually be used by someone who doesn't have the claw shots or the spinner. Having small fighting trials mixed in with climbing these ruined staircases makes for a satisfying end to the dungeon. This is amplified since this climb is capped off with a double Darknut fight, a fight I always seem to struggle with. This leads us to the throne room, the culmination of the Hero of Twilight's journey, and in a very roundabout way, the end of the Hero of Time's journey too. Let's not forget that the Hero Shade is the hero from both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. He's been training the Hero of Twilight to finish the job seemingly a century after the events of his battle with the Tyrant. This is the culmination of two heroes' lives. Stepping into the throne room, Link and Midna spot Ganondorf for the first time, looking eerily smug and notably looking both similar and somehow different to how he looked during the era of time, but still having his piece of the Triforce of power, making it clear that this will be a battle of the likes that Link had never seen before. Since I also don't want to just recap the story to end off the retrospective, I'll say that this version of Ganondorf is clearly one of the most powerful we've seen, possessing the Triforce of power, clearly outwitting what became of an entire realm of people, escaping his supposed eternal imprisonment and having the courage to go through with his plan. He doesn't have the full Triforce, but I'll be damned if I said that he needed the other pieces in the first place. This Ganondorf is the full package. He mocks Midna and her people at how easily they're deceived and how easily the interlopers were cast aside by the light spirits when creating the fused shadow. Here we can also see that Ganondorf now possesses the power of the more powerful members of the Twilight, making him even more formidable. Zelda strung up high, Ganondorf intends to make her a puppet to fight against the pair that have been giving him so much trouble, and also released him from his captivity in a way. Midna rushes to Zelda's aid, but the attempt is in vain, therefore beginning the fight against Phantom Zelda. If you're watching the full retrospective when it's out, you'll probably have realised that I've not really been discussing the namesake of the series that much at all, and that's because, despite having a cool design and clearly being a thought-out leader for Hyrule Kingdom, it's hard to ever actually connect with her outside of her sacrifice for Midna. You don't get to know her well enough outside of her connection to Midna. So while I love this game, it's tough that Zelda got the short straw here. Though the focus coming away from Zelda did mean that we got one of the best companions in the series, so hey, I think the trade-off is at least semi-warranted. All of this to say that Phantom Zelda should have emotional stakes, but since we're playing as Link and not Midna, It really does just end up feeling like the average Phantom Ganon fight in my opinion. Play some tennis, volleyball, badminton, shittily played football, whichever other sports you feel like calling it, and the job's a good one. After weakening the puppet, Midna uses the full might of the Fused Shadow to subdue the princess in the hopes that Ganondorf will cease to possess her further. This ends up working as we get one of the nicest shots of the hero and the Twilight Princess together, before coming into our next battle against Dark Beast Ganon. No, not the one you're probably thinking of, this one. While the last fight was clearly meant to be fought by Link's human form, this one is fought dog versus giant pig, and uses some of the skills he would have learnt as a farmer in his late teens to early 20s. Link signals when to grab the Dark Beast, Midna does the thing and throws him aside. Upon doing this, you can strike the weak point on his chest caused by the sages during his execution. This fight is definitely more so about the spectacle of it all, but I can get behind that. It's pretty fun and never fails to bring a smile to my face. Thinking back to herding the goats at the very start of the game, and flashing forward to handling a giant boar is one of those callbacks that just brings a fat grin to my face. The heroes think the battle is over, and the portion of Zelda's life force that was given to Midna is returned to the princess. Or rather the queen, really. This makes for a nice moment as both prominent pieces of royalty from the realms have a second of peace, before it's ruined by Ganondorf as he makes yet another return, the stubborn bugger. Once again, Midna summons the full power of the Fused Shadow in an effort to stop him for good. She teleports Link and Zelda away from the castle. One really nice detail in this moment is Link reaching to grab for Midna. Again, it makes you think back to meeting her and thinking that she wasn't a good person. It's also one of the few times in the entire series that we see a version of Link really care for someone as he believes they could be reaching their end. The hero and Zelda look out at Hyrule Field in the hope that Midna escaped, but no such luck, and in fact, there's a giant explosion near the castle. As the smoke clears, Ganondorf is sat on his horse, Midna's helmet in hand before crushing it, once again showing the sheer power of this villain, especially with the Sword of Sages in hand, the sword that was used in his execution so many years before. The Light Spirits gift Zelda with the Bow of Light, one of the few items that could really affect this enraged Demon King, and as you open your eyes once more, you're sitting on your horse. Tingle. Wait a minute, that's just the name I called my horse. I mean Epona. Epona in this game isn't the most well written. Go figures, it's a horse. But it's definitely the most involved one of the mounts in these games has been utilised, since it's your main way of traversing Hyrule Field, and the field is way bigger than Ocarina of Time's. Fighting alongside Epona at this stage in the game feels like a perfect send-off for one of the characters that you've been with on this entire journey, through thick and thin. That being said, I am indifferent on this fight apart from the emotional impact of being with Epona. I've never been a huge fan of horseback fights in any game, not even in Elden Ring where they seem way more thought out. Once again, fighting on the hills of Hyrule Field is nice, but I find it memorable for its spectacle more so than its battle. Link slashes at Ganondorf one final time, and his body seems to go limp before his horse gives way. Ganondorf lay on the field, the dirt obstructing the hero's view, before he stands up, showing his relentless determination. Link hops off his trusty companion and approaches the villain. Ganondorf whips out his sword with the intent to blot out the light forever. And what ensues is one of these single coolest fights in the series. In the middle of Hyrule Field, the castle in the background, darkness versus light. There's not much I can say for the fight itself, it really just is a one-on-one sword fight. Very similar to the Darknuts, but with the emotional pressure of avenging Midna and all else who fell to Ganondorf. It feels like a battle you must win, not one that you're winning because you were the chosen hero, but a battle that you picked. And we've talked about how Link can wrestle a Goron and he's herd goat with his bare hands and stuff, but this fight showcases that this hero can actually push Ganondorf back in a sword lock. That alone is impressive, but let's not forget that Ganondorf has the Triforce of power. Link is genuinely a beast at this point. He uses all of the techniques given to him by his ancestor and finally settles the score, driving the Master Sword deep into Ganondorf's wound. He stands to meet his demise, getting his final words out, before the Triforce of power abandons him, and all that's left is him, just barely breathing, before Zant deals the final blow and breaks his neck. The pair left on the battlefield look around in amazement as the Light Spirit greets them after their journey, with someone knocked out just below them, Midna's real form. Midna's arc fully complete, being someone who's twisted, an imp, something you wouldn't think to be human. As the game plays out, you see her becoming more human, having compassion, before she's finally seen as a human, or a Twilight in this case. For the future of her people, Midna has to go back to the Twilight Realm to be a true leader this time, and help her people. The princess and the hero say their goodbyes as Midna steps through into the Twilight Realm, breaking the Mirror of Twilight in the process. Roll credits.
Right then,
Now that the end of the story has been conquered, it's time to talk about some other stuff that just didn't fit into the original run of videos. Substantial side quests like the Cave of Ordeals and Shadows in HD, my general thoughts on the heart pieces and where they're found, an overall dungeon ranking, some other smaller side stuff like minigames, and of course, a look at some individual characters. So, let's wrap all of this up. The Cave of Ordeals is one of the best mini-dungeon gauntlet-like areas in the entire series in my opinion. Sure, does the general theme of Gerudo Desert's underground kinda get old after 50 floors? Yeah, it does. And as you guys will know after watching this video, yeah, I am a stickler for theming. But honestly, I don't think it applies to this mini-dungeon. There have been countless gauntlets like this in Zelda games. Most recently, we have the Trial of the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild. And I do think that takes the crown as the best due to the gameplay creativity in that game and starting back at square one. But the Cave of Ordeals has one massive benefit running for it: Twilight Princess's enemy and combat variety. Now, I'd never tell you that Twilight Princess has the best combat in the series, just some of the most varied. Especially when you have all of the hidden skills. They alone elevate this game's combat far above any title that came before it, and honestly nearly after it as well. The combat doesn't have the sheer creativity that the last few games would, but taking the baseline of Ocarina of Time's moveset and then building upon it by adding all of these little hidden skills that vastly change how you can fight enemies. Things like the Mortal Draw are staples to use in my playthroughs nowadays, honestly. And the Cave of Ordeals is here to specifically challenge your mastery of all of your skills. It's a long trial, but as you delve further into the cave, you start to notice a few more dark nuts scattered around. And if you're like me, you'll also notice that you've finally started to master fighting a dark nut, the premier pure combat test that this game offers. The Cave of Ordeals isn't really built to be a dungeon, but just to be a test of your knowledge with the mechanics of the game, and I think it really excels at that. Sure, is it annoying if you die in this cave? Yeah, but there are a few ways to be smart about getting through the cave too. Using certain items on certain enemies will vastly change just how long it takes you to best this trial. I could honestly see an argument for the Cave of Ordeals being better than the Trial of the Master Sword in some ways. This cave is really tough, but a fair challenge on a first playthrough. I really applaud the devs for making something like that. You can take it on basically any time with limited access due to the items you have. It's just a really fun challenge. Kudos to the devs. The reward at the end of this challenge could be considered mixed, being basically more access to fairies around Hyrule. But there are also some souls to grab in there. Now, the Cave of Shadows in Twilight Princess HD is a bit of a different beast, both literally and metaphorically. This cave has you seeing if you've mastered your skills as Wolf Link. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Wolf Link already, and I do think that the higher floors aren't that crazy and can be a bit fun. But overall, it comes to 40 floors long and gives you access to a new wallet upgrade, which can then allow you to use the magic armor for far longer than you could in the original version of the game. These rewards for the caves, they aren't crazy, but considering you'll just be wanting more to do in the game, I think they're just alright. The Cave of Shadows itself is legitimately really hard, one of the hardest 3D Zelda challenges pre-Breath of the Wild in my opinion. The focus on Wolf Link just makes things more challenging, especially if you've never beaten some of these enemies in Wolf Link form, and I'll be honest and say that I try my best not to change back into Wolf Link where I can help it in the base game. The cave might just be so hard because I'm not great at the combat, and I can accept that. I appreciate how difficult the challenge is, but the Cave of Shadows doesn't wow me like the Cave of Ordeals because of the comparatively low ceiling Wolf Link combat gives you. I don't have much else to say on it. I like the theme a little more than the Cave of Ordeals, but not by much. Overall, these mini dungeons are fun, if not tough, little romps. Okay, so with that out of the way, it's time for my dungeon ranking. Because this series has been a far longer project than I anticipated, some of my rankings may have changed since I originally gave my thoughts on them in this retrospective, but my general thoughts still apply. The dungeons themselves aren't any better or worse, I just think that they're all so relatively close in my mind that it's hard to rank them. Number 11. The Forest Temple. Very handholdy and suffers from the same first dungeonitis a lot of the first 3D Zelda temples have. Number 10, Cave of Shadows. A lot of gameplay, not with much variety, but mastering Wolf Link gameplay is still some amount of fun. Number 9, City in the Sky. I think that the theme is very cool, and finally exploring the ancient city of the Uka is really fun, but the actual dungeon itself stumbles in my opinion.
Number 8, the Cave of Ordeals. I couldn't find a way to drop this one any higher. Mastering items and your moveset is great fun, but I've never been a huge fan of the gauntlet in these games overall, despite appreciating them, so it finds itself here. Number 7, Lakebed Temple. I feel like I like this dungeon far more than a lot of people. Speaking of, actually, I'd say everything from number 7 onwards is actually really hard to decide on. Number 7 to number 4 could change in an instant. I think Lakebed is one of the best water temples in the series, but paired with a bunch of the best dungeons in the series, so it doesn't quite hit as hard as the rest of the pack. Number 6, the Temple of Time. Some people absolutely love this dungeon. It's not one of my favourites, but I really appreciate the themes and the idea of exploring the Temple of Time of yesteryear. I just don't like the item that much despite its puzzling potential. Number 5, the Palace of Twilight. I'm also aware that some people despise this dungeon's guts, but I love this one. Finally getting to the realm you've been fighting against all game and seeing the humanity in it paired with an awesome boss fight and terrifying hands that chase you around is a thing to behold. I love this one. Number 4, Hyrule Castle. The grandeur of this castle is unmatched by any that come before or after it and serves as an epic conclusion to an already epic story. Number 3, podium spot, the Goron Mines. You know, I go back and forth on this one, and right now, I think I clearly love it. It's got a very clear and distinct theme, a very clear place in the world, and is the first real non-handholdy dungeon in the game. Personally, it's just a better Dodongo's Cavern, and that's a great title to have. Okay, next, number 2, Snowpeak Ruins, I think. The top 2 dungeons in this game also challenge for top 2 in the entire series, and I've never been able to cleanly decide. Snowpeak has the atmosphere that I love so much, and a really cool item and compelling story to go with it. The song is amazing, and I'll never get sick of replaying this one. Number 1, Arbiter's Grounds. I know it's a pretty normie pick to pick this one, but it's just so good it's hard not to. While I don't think it masters atmosphere like Snowpeak, it does have one of the best lore bits behind it in the entire series, Ganondorf being locked into the Twilight Realm from here. One of the best, if underutilized items in the spinner, and it has some of the most robust and interesting enemies in the game too. Amazing puzzles as well, might I add. It's just a great time. So our winner by just a hair is Arbiter's Grounds. Make sure to drop your list in the comments. Now, what do you get at the end of a dungeon? A heart piece. Okay. Time to talk about heart pieces. Honestly, I like to look at heart pieces in this game as a whole. I like to look at how nice a Zelda game was to 100%, and sure, Hyrule Field itself isn't populated fully. It's probably the number 1 problem that a lot of people have with this game. But there are a good few heart pieces in Hyrule Field that are really fun to find. There's even some caves that just flesh out the world. Before Breath of the Wild, this is still one of my favourite iterations of an open world in Hyrule. Even though many people find it to be barren, I actually find it really, really fun to explore. I think it's something to do with the vibe and generally just wanting more to do in the game. Something we already touched on in the Cave of Ordeals and Shadows section. I just like having more to do. I didn't find any of the heart pieces ridiculously hard to find, but at the same time, I think I just had fun finding the ones that are there. Plus, you need 5 of them to get 1 extra heart in this game, something that hasn't been replicated in another 3D Zelda title since or before. It definitely does feel less impactful when you get a heart piece, but this 5 heart piece system does make getting a new heart so much cooler in my opinion. Overall, I just really enjoy 100% in Twilight Princess. It's probably my favourite Zelda title to 100% too, even if the main game isn't crazy replayable. And where do we get some of the heart pieces? The minigames. Quick section here. The minigames aren't my favourite in a Zelda game. In fact, I'd say they're just kinda there. The goat herding minigame gets old by the end of the intro, never mind further into the game, but it is nice from a thematic standpoint that Link would go home and do his job just for a day. Cat Hunt is kinda tedious, not much more on that one. Flight by Fowl is a fun one to do if you're feeling like getting some rupees. It's not super hard, it's actually pretty easy. Fruit Pop Flight is also pretty tedious and too long in my opinion. It's an interesting concept though. Roll Gold reminds me of a few tilting puzzles of yesteryear, and that's about as much fun as I have with that one personally. If I'm in the mood, then I guess it's okay. Rapids Ride is another slightly tedious one, but I have more fun with this than Fruit Pop Flight. Going down a river in a boat isn't something that you did in the 3D Zelda series before Breath of the Wild, so it's a weirdly fun minigame. Snowboard Race is goated. Love every second of it, and I love the little shortcuts you can find if you apply yourself. Super fun game. And finally, the Star game. I think the general consensus is that everyone loves this one, but it's never been particularly memorable to me, honestly. The arena that you play in is super cool though, that much I can't deny at all. Minigames are the soul of some Zelda titles. I don't think they add too much to Twilight Princess compared to a game like, Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, in my opinion. But once again, I do like the idea of the hero needing a rest and just playing some games for a bit. This is like segue to the end of the video, but what's one of the most interesting parts of a minigame? The music. Generally, Twilight Princess's music is one of my favourite parts of the game. I mentioned certain themes across this video, but it's interesting to see how these themes completely subvert what your expectation for the area would be most of the time. But me and the Cave Boys actually went through Twilight Princess's music a lot in a video a few weeks ago about the music in Zelda games, so make sure to go give that a quick watch when you get the chance if you want my full thoughts on the music too. It'll be in the description and the comments. And finally, a quick talk on certain characters. I feel like I covered Midna just enough earlier, but yeah, best companion in the series easily. Ilia has a very tropey vibe to her story, but I kinda like how every time he sees her, Link is almost thrown back to his childhood. For a guy that's such a badass, I do love seeing him mellow for a moment. Ilia's story itself isn't the strongest. King Bulblin is the best mini-boss in the series and actually one of my favourite side antagonists. His arc is surprisingly well done despite barely any dialogue being used at all by the character himself, a stellar side character. A couple of the kid characters don't have too much of an arc. Tallow kinda gains courage by looking at Link do stuff, but more so in a childish way. Mallow ends up with his own shop, which I think is just cool. Sure, he's a tiny little baby child, but it's really different to see Mallow with a thriving shop in Castletown by the end of the game. Even if it doesn't play into the main story itself, it's just kind of fun. Beth doesn't really have much from memory, but I guess that's okay. Not every character is going to have a crazy arc. Colin is my favourite child character purely for the moment in Kakariko Village. Saving one of his, friends. He starts the game off by being a bullied little kid outside of the three main children cast members. By the end, he has grown with Link. You can see a world where Colin became a knight of Hyrule or a hero of his own due to the influence of the hero of Twilight. Telma doesn't have a huge arc, but seeing her help the rest of the cast to stop the Twilight is just the perfect kind of side character energy. Plus, her bar is a hotspot for the heroes of this game. I don't really want to go into every single character, so I think I'll just finish off with the Resistance as a collective. Oru, Ashe, Russell and Shad. Hopefully I didn't butcher one of those names. They all help you in various ways to get to dungeons or just generally in your adventure. None of them have any crazy character arcs, but knowing they're the other heroes alongside you in the village is super cool and it does give the world a sense of togetherness. I would be wrong not to mention the crazy fan love that Shad and Ashe get in particular. People absolutely adore them. Personally though, I'm a huge lover of Russell. Having him as your non-memory loss tie to Ordon Village for the majority of the game is appreciated. Plus, whenever I see him, even if he's hiding his face for a lot of the time you see him in the Resistance 4, I just feel like I see the beginning of the game. When I see Russell, I think of easier days, the first few hours of the game doing the mundane tasks of Ordon. Despite that also being his life, he still partakes in the Resistance, and that's just a cool character. Zant and Ganondorf really can be mixed together. Seeing Ganondorf's come up back to Hyrule is an epic affair, and you get to see his smarts and arrogance come into action against Zant. Zant is my favourite main side villain ever, King Bulblin aside. He has the weird factor down to a T and is the driving force for most of the game. Is this the best Ganondorf in history? Honestly no, but I still like him. He's got that epicness to him that makes the final fight just feel that much more interesting. Finally we come to Link, the big guy himself. Big man, here he is. I feel like I've done justice for the hero of Twilight in this video already. Even if he never outright states it, he has a whole lot of personality. Even if he doesn't get to emote like the hero of Winds. I think that if we dove into his psyche, he would be one of the most complicated Links in the series. I know all of my interpretations of his thoughts in this video have been headcanon, but I stand by them, and I think that most of my headcanon makes sense. It makes sense that this hero would think those things, especially his imposter syndrome in the later half of the game. And now I come to the part of this retrospective I start to think I would never get to after 2.5 years. In the time it's taken me to finally complete this giant video, I'm pretty sure my mic has changed numerous times. I've moved house twice, and basically a third time now that I basically live at my girlfriend's. I also got a girlfriend, and we've been together for almost a year now. A hell of a lot of you would have already seen her at the end of my videos too. We only got together this time last year, but she's been a friend of mine in real life and a Patreon supporter since the first video in this series came out. Absolutely nuts. The cave boys have been introduced to each other in this time. We're actually just about to go and meet each other in real life in the next month. Both Hyrule Gamer, Adam, and Zinc, Johnny, are two people who I'd consider some of my closest friends, and obviously then we've also started a joint channel in the Cave Boys. Let's also not forget, Tears of the Kingdom is releasing this time too. Truly, I am super emotional writing the end of this monolith task that I set myself. The conclusion? As I said at the start of the retrospective, this video has also haunted me in a way. Months would go by and I'd always say that I'd finish it next week, and next week, and next week, until right now. And I think a part of that was because I truly didn't want this huge video to be finished. It has been one of my favourite projects to create, and I still don't think I went into nearly everything in the game. Twilight Princess has haunted me since I was a kid for all of the right reasons. Everything just meshes with me, from the atmosphere to the gameplay to the tiniest little things. Every single thing feels like it was just made for me. Now, I don't know if I'll ever get a Zelda game I love quite as much as this, for as long as I have, but there will always be a special place in my heart for Twilight Princess. Not for being my first Zelda game, but for being the one I connected to extremely early on in life, and I will always thank the game for that. If you made it to the end of the video, I also couldn't thank you enough. Whether you've been here from the start of the original series or not, I thank you with my whole heart. You guys let me be able to have a platform to talk about my favourite gaming series, and in this case, you let me be able to talk about my single favourite Zelda title at length. Please do go and subscribe if you like this video, and I hope to see you for some of my shorter videos soon. Along with that, I hope to start up a new series with a guest in the next few months. I'm really excited about that one. Thank you so much to Sumji, who's been a patron since the very beginning of this series, and to all of you. I'm so grateful for you, and thank you. As cliche as it is, I feel like I can finally close this chapter of the YouTube channel, but also my life too. Let this video, and the Switch 2, bookend it. I'll see you guys soon, and thank you so much.